The second thing that we're going to do after hitting the record button is going over briefly what happened in chapter 1 and 2, and also revise a summary of chapter 3 from the contents summaries of each chapter. Obviously, there's just so much depth to the text. There's so much to explain that it's quite hard to get at the heart of everything. I'm even going to be a bit limited in how much I explain today. Chapter 3 is fairly long, fairly thick, and I had a great time reading it over a few days ago in preparation for this, but then basically what happened this week is I got sick. I've been sick since like Sunday night, which is when I intended to do this stream. Actually, it is now Friday afternoon. I'm now almost 100%. It was like a cold. I had like some fever and stuff. I'm basically all better now. But yeah, I might be a bit rusty in terms of what I remember, and also in terms of like where my brain's at, because life is also extremely busy. I've been working, doing part-time work. I've had 2 different videos that I've been relentlessly writing. So busy times is what I'm saying, basically. But I'm really excited. Oh, also I have another video that's in the pipeline, almost finished editing and ready to upload before the end of the month. So that's all the stuff. COVID, I don't think so. I tested negative. I'm going to test myself again tomorrow morning, but I tested negative on Monday morning. Yeah. Actually, I believe it was Tuesday morning, and I also tested negative on Sunday afternoon. So yeah, I really love this book. I might not do as much explanation for this particular section. I might not even get to read the whole chapter. I'm hoping to be done within 2 hours, and after that I might not be able to do much more. I'm building up again in terms of getting my brain into moving in one direction. Thank you for the donation, Faith. I'm getting my brain to move into a singular direction, and that takes time, and also being able to like use my words well, have energy properly, etc., etc. Thankfully, it's been lovely weather, and I hope to enjoy some sun before the end of the day. I didn't know you did live shows at 4 a.m. my time. I do live streams at all over the place. I'll have them like scheduled on the channel ahead of time, so you can sort of see when they're going to go down. Most of the time, sometimes I do random live streams out of nowhere. It's really just a matter of like, for these, you're going to have access to this on the second channel / third channel, where I upload all of my live readings and audiobook stuff that I do for free. Speaking of second channels, I also have a song that's going to come out on Monday. So that's like a bit of a teaser, 3 different videos I'm working on. One that's about to come out at the end of the month, a song that's going to come out Monday, bunch of live reading, part-time job, sick, Knicks are in the first round of the playoffs, just a lot going on. Regardless, as Leo has just said, let's get high on dialectic. Let's read Paulo Freire. I hope you all enjoy. And again, we're going to start by just going over briefly the summaries of the chapters up until this one. So chapter 1, the justification for a pedagogy of the oppressed, the contradiction between the oppressors and the oppressed, and how it is overcome. Oppression and the oppressors, oppression and the oppressed, liberation, not a gift, not a self-achievement, but a mutual process. Thank you, Sydney. Chapter 2, the banking concept of education as an instrument of oppression, its presuppositions, a critique, the problem-posing concept of education as an instrument for liberation, its presuppositions, the banking concept and the teacher-student contradiction, the problem-posing concept and the supersedence of the teacher-student contradiction, education, a mutual process, world-mediated, people as uncompleted beings, conscious of their incompletion, and their attempt to be more fully human. So, yeah, brief summaries of chapter 1 and 2. If you haven't read them yet, or if you want to read them again, we have uploads of me reading those chapters and doing some breakdowns as I read. And here's chapter 3, the summary before we get into it. Dialogics, the essence of education as the practice of freedom. Dialogics and dialogue. Dialogue and the search for program content. the human-world relationship, generative themes, and the program content of education as the practice of freedom, the investigation of generative themes and its methodology, the awakening of critical consciousness through the investigation of generative themes, the various stages of the investigation. So that's what we've got for chapter 3. And I'm really excited. It is quite complex, you know. Chapter 1 was fairly complex as well, so it's kind of like that one. There are some themes and some vocabulary in here that I'm going to try to kind of give some like examples and metaphors and thoughts on to help you to process them and chew on, because like any idea, it seems quite complex sometimes and quite external or abstract, but once you can kind of grasp it and apply it to real world examples in your life, etc., it becomes as simple as any other idea, like 2 + 2. Hopefully that's how it works. You know, this is kind of like me trying to be Freirean. It's Paulo Freire. I don't know why I say Freire. Brasileiro indeed. Yeah. So chapter 3, are you ready? Let's do it. I'll have a little bit more tea. As we attempt to analyze dialogue as a human phenomenon, we discover something which is the essence of dialogue itself, the word. But the word is more than just an instrument which makes dialogue possible. Accordingly, we must seek its constitutive elements. Constitutive is probably the way I should have pronounced that. I'm getting back into it. Give me a second. Hang in there with me. Within the word, we find 2 dimensions, reflection and action, in such radical interaction that if one is sacrificed, even in part, the other immediately suffers. There is no true word that is not at the same time a praxis. Note 1, some like philosophical like math stuff, action and reflection. This is like an equivalent basically. Word equals work equals praxis. Word equals work equals praxis. Right. So it's not just word plus work is practice, which is to say like learning, like reflection and action is praxis, right? That's a typical way we sort of break down what praxis means, reflection and action, not just one or the other. But reflection is action is praxis, right? Action and reflection are praxis. Word equals work equals praxis. Thus, to speak a true word is to transform the world. Note 2, some of these reflections emerged as a result of conversations with Professor Hernani Maria Fiori. An unauthentic word, one which is unable to transform reality, results when dichotomy is imposed upon its constitutive elements. When a word is deprived of its dimension of action, reflection automatically suffers as well, and the word is changed into idle chatter, into verbalism, into an alienated and alienating blah. It becomes an empty word, one which cannot denounce the world, for denunciation is impossible without a commitment to transform, and there is no transformation without action. I feel like y'all kind of know, kind of feel where he's coming from. On the other hand, if action is emphasized exclusively to the detriment of reflection, the word is converted into activism. The latter, action for action's sake, negates the true praxis and makes dialogue impossible. Either dichotomy, by creating unauthentic forms of existence, creates also unauthentic forms of thought, which reinforce the original dichotomy. So you can't have just reflection, just word, just thoughts that are just blah thrown out there. And you can't have just action that has no word, no thought, right? And so, yeah, this term activism is interesting because we associate it pretty closely with people who do political activism, activists. So people who might be organizers, people who might be involved in like public advocacy, these kinds of things. And that's not quite what is meant by activism in this sense. Activism in this sense is these kinds of actions, or just actions in general, that don't have the reflection as part of their process, which activists who are good at being activists do, and how we use the term colloquially. But it's also kind of fun to hold on to this terminology and not say, oh, he probably should use a different word here. Because at the very least, it reminds us that merely being activists, merely trying to do activism, action for action's sake, is not the point. We have to be in the process of reflection. And likewise, when we're in our classrooms, when we're doing our readings, our theory reading and all that shit, we have to apply action as well. We can't just navel gaze and talk about Sartre all day and think that that's doing something. It's not. Human existence cannot be silent, nor can it be nourished by false words, but only by true words with which men and women transform the world. To exist humanly is to name the world, to change it. Once named, the world in its turn reappears to the namers as a problem and requires of them a new naming. Human beings are not built in silence, but in word, in work, in action, reflection. Note 3, I obviously do not refer to the silence of profound meditation, in which men only apparently leave the world, withdrawing from it in order to consider it in its totality and thus remaining with it. But this type of retreat is only authentic when the meditator is bathed in reality, not when the retreat signifies contempt for the world and flight from it in a type of historical schizophrenia. So, important thoughts on meditation. Meditation is also one of those things that you have to have a practice with, essentially. It has to be based in engaging with the world. It can't be just a retreat from the world, which so many of us are basically caught up in doing and conceive of meditation as doing, and do mindfulness practices, for instance, that we co-opt from Buddhism, speaking as a Buddhist. A lot of us kind of do it with the wrong idea in mind, which is to escape from the world, to sort of win over the world in that way, over the historical process, which is not only not good, but also not really Buddhist either. But while to say the true word, which is work, which is praxis, is to transform the world, saying that word is not the privilege of some few persons, but the right of everyone. Consequently, no one can say a true word alone, nor can she say it for another, in a prescriptive act which robs others of their words. Dialogue is the encounter between men, mediated by the world, in order to name the world. Big quote there. Note that. Hence, dialogue cannot occur between those who want to name the world and those who do not wish this naming, between those who deny others the right to speak their word and those whose right to speak has been denied them. Those who have been denied their primordial right to speak their word must first reclaim this right and prevent the continuation of this dehumanizing aggression. If it is in speaking their word that people, by naming the world, transform it, dialogue imposes itself as the way by which they achieve significance as human beings. Dialogue is thus an existential necessity. And since dialogue is the encounter in which the united reflection and action of the dialoguers are addressed to the world, which is to be transformed and humanized, this dialogue cannot be reduced to the act of one person's depositing ideas in another, nor can it become a simple exchange of ideas to be consumed by the discussants. Nor yet is it a hostile polemical argument between those who are committed neither to the naming of the world nor to the search for truth, but rather to the imposition of their own truth. Because dialogue is an encounter among women and men who name the world, it must not be a situation where some name on behalf of others. It is an act of creation. It must not serve as a crafty instrument for the domination of one person by another. The domination implicit in dialogue is that of the world by the dialoguers. It is conquest of the world for the liberation of humankind. The liberation of humankind. Dialogue cannot exist, however, in the absence of a profound love for the world and for people. The naming of the world, which is an act of creation and recreation, is not possible if it is not infused with love. Note 4. I am more and more convinced that true revolutionaries must perceive the revolution, because of its creative and liberating nature, as an act of love. For me, the revolution, which is not possible without a theory of revolution, and therefore science, is not irreconcilable with love. On the contrary, the revolution is made by people to achieve their humanization. What indeed is the deeper motive which moves individuals to become revolutionaries but the dehumanization of people? The distortion imposed on the word love by the capitalist world cannot prevent the revolution from being essentially loving in character, nor can it prevent the revolutionaries from affirming their love of life. Guevara, while admitting the risk of seeming ridiculous, was not afraid to affirm it. Let me say, with the risk of appearing ridiculous, that the true revolutionary is guided by strong feelings of love. It is impossible to think of an authentic revolutionary without this quality. Venceremos, the speeches and writings of Che Guevara, edited by John Garassi. Let me take a quick note here. Hope you don't mind. And I hope y'all take notes too. That's an important part of the reading process. Continuamos. Here we go. Hi, everyone. That is a thick footnote, right? Love is at the same time the foundation of dialogue and dialogue itself. It is thus necessarily the task of responsible subjects and cannot exist in a relation of domination. Domination reveals the pathology of love, sadism in the dominator and masochism in the dominated. Because love is an act of courage, not of fear, love is commitment to others. No matter where the oppressed are found, the act of love is commitment to their cause, the cause of liberation. And this commitment, because it is loving, is dialogical. As an act of bravery, love cannot be sentimental. As an act of freedom, it must not serve as a pretext for manipulation. It must generate other acts of freedom. Otherwise, it is not love. Only by abolishing the situation of oppression is it possible to restore the love which that situation made impossible. If I do not love the world, if I do not love life, if I do not love people, I cannot enter into dialogue. On the other hand, dialogue cannot exist without humility. The naming of the world, through which people constantly recreate that world, cannot be an act of arrogance. Dialogue, as the encounter of those addressed to the common task of learning and acting, is broken if the parties, or one of them, lack humility. How can I dialogue if I always project ignorance onto others and never perceive my own? Eyebrow raise. Looks over at chat. How can I dialogue if I always project ignorance onto others and never perceive my own? Big quote. Big quote. How can I dialogue if I regard myself as a case apart from others, mere its, in whom I cannot recognize other I's? How can I dialogue if I consider myself a member of the in-group of pure men, the owners of truth and knowledge, for whom all non-members are these people, or the great unwashed? How can I dialogue if I start from the premise that naming the world is the task of an elite, and that the presence of the people in history is a sign of deterioration, thus to be avoided? How can I dialogue if I am closed to and even offended by the contribution of others? How can I dialogue if I am afraid of being displaced, the mere possibility causing me torment and weakness? Self-sufficiency is incompatible with dialogue. Men and women who lack humility or have lost it cannot come to the people, cannot be their partners in naming the world. Someone who cannot acknowledge himself to be as mortal as everyone else still has a long way to go before he can reach the point of encounter. At the point of encounter, there are neither utter ignoramuses nor perfect sages. There are only people who are attempting, together, to learn more than they now know. Dialogue further requires an intense faith in humankind, faith in their power to make and remake, to create and recreate, faith in their vocation to be more fully human, which is not the privilege of an elite, but the birthright of all. Faith in people is an a priori requirement for dialogue. Big quote. Bold that one. Faith in people is an a priori requirement for dialogue. The dialogical man believes in others even before he meets them face to face. His faith, however, is not naive. The dialogical man is critical and knows that although it is within the power of humans to create and transform, in a concrete situation of alienation, individuals may be impaired in the use of that power. Far from destroying his faith in the people, however, this possibility strikes him as a challenge to which he must respond. He is convinced that the power to create and transform, even when thwarted in concrete situations, tends to be reborn. And that rebirth can occur, not gratuitously, but in and through the struggle for liberation, in the supersedence of slave labor by emancipated labor, which gives zest to life. Without this faith in people, dialogue is a farce which inevitably degenerates into paternalistic manipulation. Faith in people is that important. It's that important. If you're going to be a teacher, if you're going to be any type of radical, if you're going to do any type of work to help change people's minds, to help make the world a better place, you have to have faith in people, because otherwise, what are you doing? Why try to fix a world that you have no faith in? Why try to help human beings and help learn with and guide and teach human beings if you don't have any faith in them? Unless he's an introvert and all the people he had faith in wore him out, he had to nap. Well, obviously you can take naps, yeah. Sometimes you do have to vent your frustrations, and sometimes we will say things like, these people are just hopeless, these people are stupid, But we got to keep that to ourselves, avoid trying to talk like that, Like, sometimes you need rest. You can't take on so much on your own as well. You have to just continue to have that faith in your dialogue, in your engagement. And if you're not able to have that faith, you need to give yourself time to process, to be alone, to think, to have some fun, maybe. Whatever it is you got to do to get that faith back. You need it. Founding itself upon love, humility, and faith, dialogue becomes a horizontal relationship of which mutual trust between the dialoguers is the logical consequence. It would be a contradiction in terms if dialogue, loving, humble, and full of faith, did not produce this climate of mutual trust, which leads the dialoguers into ever closer partnership in the naming of the world. Conversely, such trust is obviously absent in the anti-dialogics of the banking method of education. Think about it. That's part of why the school system's so bad, because you go in as a student, 12 years old, 14 years old, whatever level you're at, and you can feel intensely how little faith everybody who's in charge has in you, of being able to figure things out on your own, of being able to know what's right from wrong, right? Whereas faith in humankind is an a priori requirement for dialogue, trust is established by dialogue. Should it founder, it will be seen that the preconditions were lacking. False love, false humility, and feeble faith in others cannot create trust. Trust is contingent on the evidence which one party provides the others of his true, concrete intentions. It cannot exist if that party's words do not coincide with their actions. To say one thing and do another, to take one's own word lightly, cannot inspire trust. To glorify democracy and to silence the people is a farce. To discourse on humanism and to negate people is a lie. Nor yet can dialogue exist without hope. Hope is rooted in men's incompletion, from which they move out in constant search, a search which can be carried out only in communion with others. Hopelessness is a form of silence, of denying the world and fleeing from it. The dehumanization resulting from an unjust order is not a cause for despair, but for hope, leading to the incessant pursuit of the humanity denied by injustice. Hope, however, does not consist in crossing one's arms and waiting. As long as I fight, I am moved by hope, and if I fight with hope, then I can wait. As the encounter of women and men seeking to be more fully human, dialogue cannot be carried on in a climate of hopelessness. If the dialoguers expect nothing to come of their efforts, their encounter will be empty and sterile, bureaucratic and tedious. Finally, true dialogue cannot exist unless the dialoguers engage in critical thinking. Thinking which discerns an indivisible solidarity between the world and the people and admits of no dichotomy between them. Thinking which perceives reality as a process, as transformation, rather than as a static entity. Thinking which does not separate itself from action, but constantly immerses itself in temporality without fear of the risks involved. Critical thinking contrasts with naive thinking, which sees historical time as a weight, a stratification of the acquisitions and experiences of the past, from which the present should emerge normalized and well-behaved. Note 5 from the letter of a friend. I love this. This is a great sort of way to kind of get at this sort of liberal issue. You know, don't glorify revolution kinds of things, you know. For the naive thinker, the important thing is accommodation to this normalized today. For the critic, the important thing is the continuing transformation of reality in behalf of the continuing humanization of men. In the words of Paulo Freire, the goal will no longer be to eliminate the risks of temporality by clutching to guaranteed space, but rather to temporalize space. The universe is revealed to me not as space, imposing a massive presence to which I can but adapt, but as a scope, a domain which takes shape as I act upon it. Note 6, Paulo Freire, Educação e Vida. For naive thinking, the goal is precisely to hold fast to this guaranteed space and adjust to it. By thus denying temporality, it denies itself as well. Only dialogue which requires critical thinking is also capable of generating critical thinking. Without dialogue, there is no communication, and without communication, there can be no true education. That's a bar. Education which is able to resolve the contradiction between teacher and student takes place in a situation in which both address their act of cognition to the object by which they are mediated. Thus, the dialogical character of education as the practice of freedom does not begin when the teacher's student meets with the student's teachers in a pedagogical situation, but rather when the former first asks herself or himself what she or he will dialogue with the latter about. And preoccupation with the content of dialogue is really preoccupation with the program content of education. It's like for the anti-dialogical banking educator, the question of content simply concerns the program about which he will discourse to his students. And he answers his own question by organizing his own program. For the dialogical, problem-posing teacher-student, the program content of education is neither a gift nor an imposition, bits of information to be deposited in the students, but rather the organized, systematized, and developed representation to individuals of the things about which they want to know more. Very crucial stuff here. Note 7. In a long conversation with Mao Zedong declared, I've proclaimed for a long time. We must teach the masses clearly what we have received from them confusedly. This affirmation contains an entire dialogical theory of how to construct the program content of education, which cannot be elaborated according to what the educator thinks best for the students. The irony, because you see a lot of sort of people who call themselves Maoists these days, not all Maoists, of course, but a lot of the sort of Maoist contingent are folks that are just like, and this is true of so many different leftist sects, online, offline, I'm going to dictate to you what it is that you need to know, right? And even when there is an attempt to approach subjects, like you're going to tell me what you're interested in, and I'm going to break down why it's about capitalism, etc., etc. This isn't really getting at the interests and the needs and the thoughts of the students. The student comes to you with a question. How do I do this? What is this? And your job is to help them get that answer, even if you don't have it, especially if you don't have it. Authentic education is not carried on by A for B or by A about B, but rather by A with B, mediated by the world. A world which impresses and challenges both parties, giving rise to views or opinions about it. These views, impregnated with anxieties, doubts, hopes, or hopelessness, imply significant themes on the basis of which the program content of education can be built. In its desire to create an ideal model of the good man, a naively conceived humanism often overlooks the concrete, existential, present situation of real people. Authentic humanism, in Pierre Furter's words, consists in permitting the emergence of the awareness of our full humanity as a condition and as an obligation, as a situation and as a project. Note 8, Furter, page 165. We simply cannot go to the laborers, urban or peasant, in the banking style, to give them knowledge or to impose upon them the model of the good man contained in a program whose content we have ourselves organized. Note 9. The latter, usually submerged in a colonial context, are almost umbilically linked to the world of nature, in relation to which they feel themselves to be component parts rather than shapers. Many political and educational plans have failed because their authors designed them according to their own personal views of reality, never once taking into account, except as mere objects of their actions, the men in a situation to whom their program was ostensibly directed. For the truly humanist educator and the authentic revolutionary, the object of action is the reality to be transformed by them together with other people, not other men and women themselves. The oppressors are the ones who act upon the people to indoctrinate them and adjust them to a reality which must remain untouched. Unfortunately, however, in their desire to obtain the support of the people for revolutionary action, revolutionary leaders often fall for the banking line of planning program content from the top down. They approach the peasant or urban masses with projects which may correspond to their own view of the world, but not to that of the people. Note 10. Our cultural workers must serve the people with great enthusiasm and devotion, and they must link themselves with the masses, and not divorce themselves from the masses. In order to do so, they must act in accordance with the needs and wishes of the masses. All work done for the masses must start from their needs, and not from the desire of any individual, however well-intentioned. It often happens that objectively the masses need a certain change, but subjectively they are not yet conscious of the need, not yet willing or determined to make the change. In such cases, we should wait patiently. We should not make the change until, through our work, most of the masses have become conscious of the need and are willing and determined to carry it out. Good luck, Leo. Otherwise, we shall isolate ourselves from the masses. There are two principles here. One is the actual needs of the masses, rather than what we fancy they need, and the other is the wishes of the masses, who must make up their own minds instead of our making up their minds for them. From the selected works of Mao Zedong, Volume 3, The United Front in Cultural Work, October 30th, 1944, and Peking, 1967. Greetings from Mexico. Greetings to Mexico. Saludos. They forget that their fundamental objective is to fight alongside the people for the recovery of the people's stolen humanity, not to win the people over to their side. Such a phrase does not belong in the vocabulary of revolutionary leaders, but in that of the oppressor. No winning people over. We don't win people over. The revolutionary's role is to liberate and be liberated with the people, not to win them over. In their political activity, the dominant elites utilize the banking concept to encourage passivity in the oppressed, corresponding with the latter's submerged state of consciousness, and take advantage of that passivity to fill that consciousness with slogans which create even more fear of freedom. This practice is incompatible with a truly liberating course of action, which, by presenting the oppressors' slogans as a problem, helps the oppressed to eject those slogans from within themselves. After all, the task of the humanists is surely not that of pitting their slogans against the slogans of the oppressors, with the oppressed as the testing ground, housing the slogans of first one group and then the other. On the contrary, the task of the humanists is to see that the oppressed become aware of the fact that as dual beings housing the oppressors within themselves, they cannot be truly human. This task implies that revolutionary leaders do not go to the people in order to bring them a message of salvation, but in order to come to know through dialogue with them both their objective situation and their awareness of that situation, the various levels of perception of themselves and of the world in which and with which they exist. One cannot expect positive results from an educational or political action program which fails to respect the particular view of the world held by the people. Such a program constitutes cultural invasion, good intentions notwithstanding. Note 11. This point will be analyzed in detail in Chapter 4. I think that's really cool, Blink Pups. I probably would want to see your probability in Pokemon lesson. The starting point for organizing the program content of education or political action must be the present existential concrete situation reflecting the aspirations of the people. Utilizing certain basic contradictions, we must pose this existential concrete present situation to the people as a problem which challenges them and requires a response, not just at the intellectual level, but at the level of action. Note 12. It is as self-contradictory for true humanists to use the banking method as it would be for rightists to engage in a problem-posing education. The latter are always consistent. They never use a problem-posing pedagogy. I don't speak Portuguese. I do speak Spanish, and I know a couple of Portuguese pronunciation things. So that's carrying right now. We must never merely discourse on the present situation, must never provide the people with programs which have little or nothing to do with their own preoccupations, doubts, hopes, and fears, programs which at times, in fact, increase the fears of the oppressed consciousness. It is not our role to speak to the people about our own view of the world, nor to attempt to impose that view on them, but rather to dialogue with the people about their view and ours. We must realize that their view of the world, manifested variously in their action, reflects their situation in the world. Educational and political action which is not critically aware of this situation runs the risk either of banking or of preaching in the desert. Often educators and politicians speak and are not understood because their language is not attuned to the concrete situation of the people they address. Big stuff here. Muchas gracias, Diosa. Accordingly, their talk is just alienated and alienating rhetoric. The language of the educator or the politician, and it seems more and more clear that the latter must also become an educator in the broadest sense of the word, like the language of the people, cannot exist without thought, and neither language nor thought can exist without a structure to which they refer. In order to communicate effectively, educator and politician must understand the structural conditions in which the thought and language of the people are dialectically framed. It is to the reality which mediates men, and to the perception of that reality held by educators and people, that we must go to find the program content of education. The investigation of what I have termed the people's thematic universe, the complex of their generative themes, inaugurates the dialogue of education as the practice of freedom. Note 13, the expression meaningful thematics is used with the same connotation. This thematic universe thing is pretty big. It's big thematically in this chapter. So, big thing to keep your notes and highlights for, you know. The methodology of that investigation must likewise be dialogical, affording the opportunity both to discover generative themes and to stimulate people's awareness in regard to these themes. Consistent with the liberating purpose of dialogical education, the object of the investigation is not persons, as if they were anatomical fragments, but rather the thought language with which men and women refer to reality, the levels at which they perceive that reality, and their view of the world in which their generative themes are found. So Leo asked an interesting question. The question I can't stop asking myself is, how can we apply all of that in the context of the rising far right? The rising far right, for one, we recognize is never going to be participating in problem-posing education, as Freire says. They're always going to be doing banking education. You either see it their way, as they have placed it in your head, or you are wrong and or an enemy. You know, it is to create very rigid lines as a response to threats to the established order, so as to discipline people to fall back in line and not threaten that established order. There has been all these different movements. There have been all these different movements, whether strictly political or strictly sort of apolitical, as we might view them, like even technological developments that represent threats to established order, threats to elites, threats to oppressors. And so fascism emerges from that as a disciplining tool. And this is something that Clara Matei's book about liberalism and fascism and discipline as austerity, I think it's called The Austerity Order. We've covered it in some videos here. That's sort of what it gets at, is that fascism comes as the part of the disciplining violence that happens to the people when they starts to push the system and starts to try to engage in problem-posing education, questioning things, really getting true knowledge about things, and then trying to change the negatives of the reality, trying to change the world for the better. And so you're not going to necessarily be engaged in educating people in problem-posing education if they are rightists, if they are far right, if they're fascists. They're going to be trying to stop you from doing that. And so often you're going to be entering situations of self-defense more so than anything. Making sure that you survive, making sure that you're safe by, whatever the situation calls for, I guess you can say. Like sometimes just escaping, getting out of certain situations, not working with certain people, right? The minute that we try to engage in the same kind of disciplining and banking education that the rightists do as a way to try to keep up with them, we lose. That's their whole territory. Before describing a generative theme more precisely, which will also clarify what is meant by a minimum thematic universe, it seems to me indispensable to present a few preliminary reflections. The concept of a generative theme is neither an arbitrary invention nor a working hypothesis to be proved. I keep saying neither and then neither. I hope you're cool with both. And I hope you're not cool with neither, or neither. You can do either or either, whatever. If it were a hypothesis to be proved, the initial investigation would seek not to ascertain the nature of the theme, but rather the very existence or non-existence of themes themselves. In that event, before attempting to understand the theme in its richness, its significance, its plurality, its transformations, and its historical composition, we would first have to verify whether or not it is an objective fact. Only then could we proceed to apprehend it. Sorry, I was checking something on the side here. Only then could we proceed to apprehend it. Although an attitude of critical doubt is legitimate, it does appear possible to verify the reality of the generative theme, not only through one's own existential experience, but also through critical reflection on the human-world relationship and on the relationships between people implicit in the former. This point deserves more attention. One may well remember, trite as it seems, that of the uncompleted beings, man is the only one to treat not only his actions, but his very self as the object of his reflection. This capacity distinguishes him from the animals, which are unable to separate themselves from their activity and thus are unable to reflect upon it. In this apparently superficial distinction lie the boundaries which delimit the action of each in his life space. Because the animals' activity is an extension of themselves, the results of that activity are also inseparable from themselves. Animals can neither set objectives nor infuse their transformation of nature with any significance beyond itself. Moreover, the decision to perform this activity belongs not to them but to their species. Animals are accordingly, fundamentally, beings in themselves. This is not a knock on animals. Unable to decide for themselves, unable to objectify either themselves or their activity, lacking objectives which they themselves have set, living submerged in a world to which they can give no meaning, lacking a tomorrow and a today because they exist in an overwhelming present, animals are ahistorical. Their ahistorical life does not occur in the world, taken in its strict meaning. For the animal, the world does not constitute a not I, which could set him apart as an I. The human world, which is historical, serves as a mere prop for the being in itself. Animals are not challenged by the configuration which confronts them. They are merely stimulated. Their life is not one of risk-taking, for they are not aware of taking risks. Risks are not challenges perceived upon reflection, but merely noted by the signs which indicate them. They accordingly do not require decision-making responses. This will be on my third channel afterwards, so you'll be able to watch anything there. Just Ice, just to let you know. Consequently, animals cannot commit themselves. Their ahistorical condition does not permit them to take on life. Because they do not take it on, they cannot construct it. And if they do not construct it, they cannot transform its configuration. Nor can they know themselves to be destroyed by life, for they cannot expand their prop world into a meaningful symbolic world, which includes culture and history. As a result, animals do not animalize their configuration in order to animalize themselves. Nor do they de-animalize themselves. Even in the forest, they remain beings in themselves, as animal-like there as in the zoo. You kind of see the difference because the whole point is like humans dehumanize themselves and humanize themselves. Animals don't do that. They're just always animals, right? Which in some ways is the nobility of the animal, but in this case also, it's understanding of the difference between the consciousness of animals versus humans, right? Which, I'm interested if folks who are well versed in this stuff and who have animal rights understandings might have different interpretations of animal consciousness. But I feel like this is a fair understanding because, animals don't record history and organize civilizations. You have to think about what reasons there are for that, and that's because animals are not thinking about anything outside of being what they are, being animals, right? They're not thinking about larger questions of the animalness and of their needs and of their species' needs, right? That's our understanding. They do behave differently than those in the wild, of course. But the distinction that Freire is making is that their behavior is ultimately based on them being animals. What humans do when we write stories and make art and organize civilizations and do politics is think about themes. We think about themes of our world and themes of humanity, themes of existence, and try to act on the world in ways that affect those themes as we see them, right? It's a messy process that we engage in specifically. What's the name of the other channel? It's called Reading with Elliot. I post on my community posts when I upload those. Animals are cool. This is not an attack on animals, right? Because it can sound a bit Promethean, a bit like, animals are just they don't have consciousness. They're not smart, right? I think Freire's point is that it's not a matter of the purity of the animal or the goodness or badness or the smartness of the animal. A divorce from their immediate circumstances might be a way to configure that, right? In contrast, the people, aware of their activity and the world in which they are situated, acting in function of the objectives which they propose, having the seat of their decisions located in themselves and in their relations with the world and with others, infusing the world with their creative presence by means of the transformation they effect upon it. Unlike animals, not only live but exist, and their existence is historical. So, important note here as well for that very sort of, again, like confusing sort of distinguishing between animals and human stuff we're doing here. Note 14. In the English language, the terms live and exist have assumed implications opposite to their etymological origins. As used here, live is the more basic term, implying only survival. Exist implies a deeper involvement in the process of becoming. So that's the difference. Animals live. Humans live and exist. They create themes of what it means to be and what the purpose of being is, and involve themselves in those themes and those processes generated by those themes, etc. Animals live out their lives on an atemporal, flat, uniform prop. Humans exist in a world which they are constantly recreating and transforming. For animals, here is only a habitat with which they enter into contact. For people, here signifies not merely a physical space, but also an historical space, right? And this is not just to speak of history books. This is not just to speak of you go to New York and you're not just thinking of your survival in New York. You're thinking of the history of New York, but historical in the sense of you're thinking of other people's interactions with New York and what things within New York mean to them. You're thinking of concepts of, what it is to be living a good life. And you're thinking of concepts of like this different attempts you've had at living a good life, different themes for living a good life, different ways to live what seems to be a good life, what it means to live a good life, right? Ultimately. And then what New York represents in that context to you, right? These are the things. You go to New York and you're like, wow, look at all these big buildings in Manhattan, in Times Square. Man, I hate those. Man, this is so overwhelming and overstimulating, right? The animal goes to Times Square, ends up in Times Square, we could say, right? And goes, where do I go for shelter? Where do I go? What do I do? I'm going to go here to hide. I'm going to go here to find food, right? This is the difference of what we think, of how our consciousnesses work, right? And this is Freire's, what he posits. Strictly speaking, here, now, there, tomorrow, and yesterday do not exist for the animal, whose life, lacking self-consciousness, is totally determined. Animals cannot surmount the limits imposed by the here, the now, or the there. Right. So animals, it's not that, again, that's not to say animals don't have memory, right? Freire's not saying animals don't remember what happened to them when they were children, because they do. Obviously, you see how animals develop these behaviors over time. For instance, to traumas that they experience when they're young, or traumas that they experience in recent times. They don't have zero memory, but they don't actuate or develop thoughts on those things. They just embody, again, that process of living, that process of here and now and there. Animals are very present, right? This is what we say about animals. Like when we have pets, we notice how they're always living in the moment, right? This is kind of a reflection of how, again, animals are not pondering for means of extracting and understanding the deeper themes of existence, essentially. Humans, however, because they are aware of themselves and thus of the world, because they are conscious beings, exist in a dialectical relationship between the determination of their limits and their own freedom. And this is where this starts to get important, because it might seem like, what the hell is all this rambling about what animals are stuck in the here and the now. As they separate themselves from the world, which they objectify, as they separate themselves from their own activity, as they locate the seat of their decisions in themselves and in their relations with the world and others, people overcome the situations which limit them. The limit situations, 15. Limit situations, key vocabulary again. We had that pop up in chapter 1, right? Professor Alvaro Vieira Pinto analyzes with clarity the problem of limit situations, using the concept without the pessimistic aspect originally found in Jaspers. For Vieira Pinto, the limit situations are not the impassable boundaries where possibilities end, but the real boundaries where all possibilities begin. They are not the frontier which separates being from nothingness, but the frontier which separates being from nothingness, but the frontier... Sorry, that was a typo. The frontier which separates being from being more. So, for instance, the animal goes to the jungle and goes, I will develop my brain and my understanding so that I can live and survive on a daily basis. The human goes to the jungle and says, what can I do with this jungle to where my survival needs are met more easily? What can I do with this jungle to develop things that are potentially going to advance my ability to live with other people? All these other things, right? Once perceived by individuals as fetters, as obstacles to their liberation, these situations stand out in relief from the background, revealing their true nature as concrete historical dimensions of a given reality. Men and women respond to the challenge, I'm stumbling a lot, with actions which Vieira Pinto calls limit acts, those directed at negating and overcoming, rather than passively accepting the given. Thus, it is not the limit situations in and of themselves which create a climate of hopelessness, but rather how they are perceived by women and men at a given historical moment, whether they appear as fetters or as insurmountable barriers. As critical perception is embodied in action, a climate of hope and confidence develops, which leads men to attempt to overcome the limit situations, which is the thing that the animal doesn't do. The animal just lives within the limit situation. The human lives within it, but then also tries to overcome it. Thank you, Julian. This objective can be achieved only through action upon the concrete, historical reality in which limit situations historically are found. As reality is transformed and these situations are superseded, new ones will appear, which in turn will evoke new limit acts. Okay, one sec. Okay. So it's fine. So where do we start again? 12. Okay, so we've done 13 pages so far. Sorry guys, I'm noticing too that I'm still like a bit out of it. Okay, let me see, because I might end up just taking a pause or stopping the stream early. I told you it's a thick chapter. We might not be able to do everything. What would be a good place for me to do a pause? Honestly, probably right here. So the prop world of animals contains no limit situations due to its ahistorical character. Right. Okay, so I'm going to stop the stream here. This has been part 1 of chapter 3 of Pedagogy of the Oppressed. I'm going to get some rest and then try to get the second part of this reading done either tonight or maybe tomorrow. That's what I'm going to go for. Right? Right. Yeah. So when we pick back up, we'll be at page 100 of Pedagogy of the Oppressed, 98 on the PDF. And we will get further into the concept of limit situations and sort of that difference in humans and animals as part of that understanding of limit situations, and then further into the concepts of thematic universes, etc. Okay, thanks everybody for watching today's stream. I'm glad I was able to do at least something, right? I will be back soon for part 2.